Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author and illustrator. Today, I'm talking with Alex London and Paul O. Zelinsky. Alex is the author of more than 30 books for children and teens, including the Accidental Adventure series, the Princess Protection Program, and the acclaimed young adult novel Proxy. Paul is the illustrator of many acclaimed books for children, including Z is for Moose and Circle, Square, Moose, both written by Kelly Bingham. His retelling of Rapunzel was awarded the 1998 Caldecott Medal, and he's received 3 Caldecott honors. Together, they're here to discuss their recently published picture book, Still Life. A still life painting is a painting where everything is supposed to stay still. But what if it doesn't? Alex and Paul are here today to help us answer that question and talk all about their newest book. So let's welcome them. Alex and Paul, welcome to KidLit Love. I'm so glad you're both here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Oh, can't wait to chat with you. I say it every time it gets to happen on the podcast, but there's just something special that happens when both the author and the illustrator of the book are here to talk about the words and the pictures. And I'm just so grateful that we were able to all hop on this call at the same time. So let's jump in. Let's start with a little bit of backstory for listeners. Alex, let's start off with you. I already gave a quick little introduction. You've got more than 30 books under your belt. So I would love to know a little bit about your backstory, how you came to KidLit. Tell us all the things.
Yeah, KidLit was a surprise career for me. I hadn't planned it. I stumbled into it. It definitely hadn't been where I thought I would end up. I knew I wanted to be a writer ever since about 5th grade, when I read Brian Jake's Redwall books, and I realized that books were awesome, and could be exciting and silly and bloody and scary and moving and filled with ideas and could transport you to another world. And so I decided, oh, I love this kind of book, and I wrote a letter to Brian, to the author, and much to my surprise, he wrote me back.
Wow.
And he was at that time like one of the most famous authors in the world for children, anyway. And it blew my mind that he would write me back and pay attention, and that he existed, that he was a real person, and it was his job. And he encouraged me to keep using my imagination, and that maybe one day I could grow up to be a writer. And that was the first moment it occurred to me. It's like, oh, this is a career you can have. You could do this. Like, someone does this, and they're real people. And so I knew from that point on, that's what I wanted to do. And then as I got older, high school, I had literary pretensions and, read Jack Kerouac like a certain kind of young man does. And it's like, oh, that's going to be my life. And in college, I got into journalism, and I started doing journalism. And then I pictured myself becoming like sort of like Sebastian Junger. I wanted to travel the world and have dangerous adventures and write about them. And I spent a little while as a war journalist and human rights researcher, doing some pretty intense, going to some intense places. And I focused on young people, on children in refugee camps and in war zones. And as you can imagine, that was pretty depressing work. And I was getting very burned out on it. And in the middle of an uprising in Burma in 2007, I found myself having to lay low because the government was looking for me. And I was stuck in this room watching satellite television, and all that was on was Nickelodeon. It was they'd scrambled any sort of news channel or anything, so all I got was Nickelodeon. So I ended up watching just a ton of SpongeBob, and it was so joyous, and somehow that sort of silly joyousness and escapism connected with what I'd heard children all over the world say who'd been surviving in some pretty horrid circumstances, whether they were child soldiers, whether they were refugees, whether it was in Africa or Asia or the Middle East or wherever. The way kids talked about stories and books, and some of them who treasured the one book they had. It suddenly all clicked for me, and I thought, I don't want to write about children anymore. I want to write for them. And so I wrote my first series called The Accidental Adventures, kind of inspired by my own adventures. And I sent it to my agent. And at this point, I was in the midst of researching my second intense nonfiction book for adults. And I sent this silly kids book called We Are Not Eaten by Yaks to my agent and said, can I write a children's book? And he said, I'll never forget, he said, I don't know, can you? um, and I was like, I guess we'll find out. And that was 32 books ago. And I think I found my calling, and I love telling all kinds of stories. I've written realistic books, I've written historical fiction, I've written absolutely silly books, I've written sci-fi, I've written fantasy, I've written now picture books, young adult, middle grade. I'm sort of all over the map, all over the genre map, the age range map. And I can't think of a better job. I feel so lucky to have fallen face first into this profession, and to get to work with geniuses like Paul Zelinsky. You
Yeah.
like how that was the segue?
That's a
That
segue.
was a beautiful segue.
Yeah, beautifully executed from the start, Alex. I can't believe that, did you hear this story? Like this life, uh, I've known Alex for a long time now, and I just can't, looking at this person thinking, this was a war correspondent.
Well, I mean,
Wars
correspondent. I wasn't like staffed anywhere. I was a freelancer, so I would show up places and try and find a story.
the same thing. I just sort of stayed at home. My story is totally the opposite, except maybe in one detail, which was the beginning of not intending to go into children's books. Um, Not that that was a decision, but because, and in spite of the fact that I loved children's books as a kid, and would go uh, into the store when my mother went shopping at the shopping center, and I would go over to the Crocs and Brentano store in Chicago, and I'd gravitate to the children's book section. I'd look through the picture books, just I love doing that, and I kept doing that well beyond standard picture book age. And I knew that I was probably going to end up being an artist because that's what I did constantly. My hand would draw whether I wanted it to or not. Um, so, and yet making the pictures in children's books, it didn't occur to me. I mean, I loved these books. I had favorite illustrators who were names, but they weren't people, or if they were people, they were dead people. And that was where it ended for me. I thought maybe I would be an artist and be a painter and make paintings for galleries, and or maybe I'd be something else. I didn't know. But the discovery that it was something you could actually do came way later for me. Alex, what did you say? You were 8 or something?
Yeah, well, fifth grade when I yeah.
I was in college, I guess, when I discovered the fact that children's books actually are made by living people. And I guess I tell this story a lot, that I was lucky enough to get into Yale. I was looking through the college catalog. It was like such a richness of things to learn about in that catalog. Every semester it would come out this thick blue book, and you'd go see what was being offered, and there would be seminars given by famous names that you knew of in every possible subject, and suddenly there was this seminar about children's books, which was very much against the grain of the kind of thing that you'd see at Yale. It wasn't sort of theoretical and highfalutin. Children's books writing and illustrating, and it was being taught by an English faculty member plus Maurice Sendak, whom I knew very well who that was. Like I said, I knew children's book illustrators, and And so I signed up for it and I got into it. It was just about a dozen kids in that class. And lo and behold, here was a living person who made children's books, including ones that I'd grown up with. I was a little too old maybe to have been there when Wild Things came out, but other things of Maurice's were in my childhood. So suddenly my idea of being an artist took on this extra sort of quality that basically, if it didn't work out for me making art for galleries, maybe I could illustrate children's books, because it felt so natural and so right for me to do this. But when something feels so natural and so right for me, I don't take that as a clue that I should be doing that. I sort of take it as the opposite. I should be working harder to do the thing that doesn't come naturally. So that was art for me. And it didn't work out exactly. I fell into plan B, moved to New York, and started showing my pictures to art directors at the publishing houses. And that was how I landed here. I'm still in New York.
So your stories are very different, but as you said, you have that one common thread. And for me, it just kind of popped out that you both had a moment, right? It was a moment, maybe two moments for you, Alex. One, when you knew people actually wrote the books, and then the second moment when you realized, I want to write those books. And then Paul, that moment for you of, oh, humans do illustrate these, and this is a possibility. That's why I love, even though most of the listeners often know the authors who are on the podcast and I get to talk to, I still love to open with that getting to know you kind of question, because those are the tidbits of information that they just light me up as a reader, to know the backstories of the people who are writing these stories, and to know that you can get that moment, and then you're putting books into kids' hands who may give them that moment from themselves. It's just like this beautiful kind of paying it forward, which
I always think of it. I always think of it as a relay race. Like we're trying to pass them the baton while we're still running.
yes.
And then sometimes they overtake us, and it's annoying and wonderful.
Both at the same time. So how did the partnership between the two of you come to be?
Well, who should tell that?
Yeah, I guess there's phases to it.
Okay.
The phase that our publisher didn't know before we were ever connected, which is that I used to live in New York. I used to live in Brooklyn, not too far from Paul. And through KidLit circles and knowing people in common, we became friendly and knew each other for a lot of years. And then at some point, about 8 years ago, I moved away from Philadelphia, and we stayed a little in touch, not as often as I think either of us would have liked. Um, and then I wrote this picture book, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in a minute, and sent it off to Martha Mahalik at Green Willow, a division of HarperCollins. And that was all I knew. I sent it off, hoped they would acquire it. And then something happened.
And then it landed in my inbox. Martha had no idea that we knew each other,
Wow.
but there it was, and it landed with this sort of question: do you think you could illustrate this? And should I go on about this?
Oh yeah.
The story that
You do.
because I read it immediately and I thought it was hilarious. I thought I really liked it, and I would have said yes right away, except I wasn't positive that it would work as a picture book. Just as a manuscript, there was we haven't described it or anything. I think people listening don't know what it is.
Right.
So maybe I should give a little short description. The manuscript was a narrator telling you what a still life is. A still life is a picture of objects that do not move. And it goes on to emphasize that point again and again,
Right.
And
And in a really like it was there wasn't much to it, right? It was the way I wrote it, it was this sort of pedantic voice saying, here's what a still life is, here are the things in a still life, here are the things not in a still life. And then I had these little art notes throughout that described some of the things happening.
well, it
Uh,
was also kind of clear from the text that when the text said, um, if you see mice uh, taking bites of the cheese and leaving jammy footprints, don't look at them, don't follow them on their winding path. So, clearly the pictures were trying to show mice in the painting and not just a painting as
yeah.
the
I
readers.
had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how explicit I needed to be in instructions to the artist and not telling them anything and letting them figure it out. Again, I didn't know it was going to, Paul. I didn't know where it was going. So I just had this sort of script for it. Uh,
Mhm. And then there, yeah,
that
and
amused me and that made me chuckle and that I thought would be a funny picture book.
you're right. And some of the notes that I think that Martha just put the notes right through, which is not always what happens with an editor. Um, in general, an illustrator doesn't want to see art notes. In general, a writer will write something and think, oh, I want to make sure that this person has brown hair and I want this kind of dress on. There are all sorts of things that I imagine writers think of, don't put in the text, and want to make sure that they show up in the pictures, which is a mistake. And the illustrator doesn't want to hear those things.
Yeah.
Not in the text. It's not a commitment. You know, um, but in this case, the, the art notes were shown. Yeah, well, Blueberry is agreeing. Yeah, the art notes. I'm very excited. The art notes really told you what was really going on when there was no clue in the writing. So that's absolutely necessary. And but the things that were going on in this painting that the narrator had no clue of or was denying. Uh, it was really funny to read. On one hand, the these strong, um, you know, what should I say, the assertion of what is in the painting, and then imagine in your head that it's not there. But I was thinking that if you weren't imagining it, but you just saw it, here was the words were saying it's not here, and the pictures were showing that it is here. I thought that might not have the same humor. It might just not be funny. You might look at it and say, "What?" So, in order to find out whether that humor could carry through, I thought I'll just make some sketches and draw a little dummy. And I started out at the beginning and tried to make rough drawings, and I still couldn't tell. It was, I kept going and going, and the more pictures I put in, it wasn't that I thought it wasn't funny, but I just felt like I really couldn't tell. And I did it from start to finish, chronologically or in that order, um, which you have to do in a dummy. And I guess it was probably because of the funny ending in the text that I didn't know until I finished it whether it would work at all. And it did. I got to the end of this dummy, and I just thought it was just as funny as a dummy as it was as a manuscript.
I
So,
I thought it was funnier. I think you elevated it.
okay.
They sent me the dummy. They said, "So we've been talking to this artist that we really like and have worked with in the past named Paul Zelinsky." I played it cool. And we hope you like it. He already made a dummy of the entire book before illustrated. I saw it and I just thought, oh wow, yes, there's a reason Paul Zelinsky is great. Like this really did elevate the text. It made the jokes funnier. It added an emotional depth to the artist's voice that hadn't been there in the text. It just blew me away. And from that moment on, it was full steam ahead. Let's work together on this. Um,
Yeah. So the book, what I loved as a reader, and I've said on the podcast before, so listeners are probably like, oh gosh, here she goes. She's going to tell me their favorite book when she was a kid again. But I am going to say my favorite book when I was a kid again, which was The Monster at the End of This Book by John Stone. And I loved it because I felt like I was in on a little secret. I felt like as a reader, I was literally in the pages, and Grover's telling me not to turn the page, and I'm turning it anyway, and I see what happens. And I felt that kind of immersiveness in still life, because you have the artist, and this is one of my favorite pages, and I know listeners can't see it, but you two can, where this artist is very artsy and is going to tell you about how things are supposed to be, and you see this, and then as a reader, the things that the artist can't see. What is going on in the painting, and it's like this little inner secret that the reader's on that just makes the book fun and funny and exciting, and just you just want to lean in a little bit more. And I just love how the book does that. I can see kids leaning in. I can see kids yelling at the book and pointing and talking, and which as an educator was one of the best moments, when the kids were living the book with you on the rug, in your circle time together. And I felt like I had that even as an adult reader reading this. I thought, oh, this artist with that smug look on his face doesn't really know what's going on,
It
does
was
he?
very superior, and it was really fun to draw him that way.
Yes, yes. And so I loved that the storyline went that way. But what you did, Paul, that I really loved is you've got, the still life part of the painting, which is illustrated in a particular way, right? In a particular feeling, like it looks like a canvas and paint. But then when the fun starts happening, when the imagination, when the life starts moving, even though the artist doesn't think so, those illustrations are done in a different way with a different feel. And so it's this beautiful, almost layering 3D effect that's on the page that like I can really feel. So I would love to ask you, because you talked about that sketching process. How did you make that decision to have the still life in one way and then all of the fun movement in this other format? How did you get there from thinking, I don't know if this is gonna work, to heck yeah, it's working?
Sort of like it's all about what is reality, this book. It's in a way that art is more real than life. In a lot of real life ways, I think that happens. People, we're populations who insist on being represented in TV shows on television. It's because if in a certain way you don't exist if you're not there in the art. It's something I think about a little bit, but uh, basically this smug artist who was talking about this still life that he made, um, that still life was going to have to be really worth it. It had to have the same quality of elevation and and smugness that gets invaded and ruined by life that intrudes. And it was obvious to me from the start that the still life had to look very much like a painting,
Mhm.
and not a loose painting, not an easy painting to make, but something that he worked very hard on and would look very, very real. So if and it was clear that the funnier everything that intrudes looks, cartoonier, looser, easier, the more that kind of idea gets expressed, and what makes it funny is funnier. So that was obvious from the beginning, and the still life had to be very realistic, but not too realistic at the same time. It also um, occurred to me that if it looked so realistic in this book, you might think you were looking at a photograph or something, or that was real, and that wouldn't work either. It had to look, you had to see that it was a painting. So the physical paintingness, the surface of a painting, texture, had to be there at all times. So it was kind of a fun challenge to figure that out.
And that's what I think is so remarkable of what you did is the textures. There's so many different textures in this book, that as you're reading it really is like this layer of what is reality. There's the painting, and then the artist making the painting, and then the experience of looking at the book that is the artist making a painting. And I think kids, I mean, in the read alouds I've done so far at schools, they just go nuts over that feeling like they're diving in to these layers.
That's really nice. I have to say one thing, that the monster at the end of this book is like the greatest meta children's book there is, and
Yeah.
it's just the funniest thing, and then just stepping back and saying, you and I are looking at this book together, and I know this. So it's a move away from the storytelling. And I may be wrong, but I think that Alex didn't do that in this manuscript, that it's not really meta. And I love that. It's, I've been thinking that there's too much of that. Meta is a meta humor is really funny because you don't expect it. And the more it spreads out and you see it everywhere, the less of a surprise it is and the less it works. So that this was a surprise that it had the same quality, but I don't think it really steps back and takes a snapshot of you looking at this and saying, the
Yeah,
story.
it never deliberately comments on itself as a book in the way that Monster at the end of this book does. The artist fully takes himself seriously, and doesn't know he's in a book.
Yeah.
I think does help. He needed that, like an actor's commitment, right? It's method acting for him. He's fully in it.
Yeah.
And in a gesture of kindness to parents, I do like that the author doesn't have Grover's voice, because oh man, the number of times I read to my daughter a monster at the end of this book just shredded my vocal cords doing that Grover voice.
Oh, although, I can picture, and there is a video, right, Paul, on your website, there is a short video introducing this book. And I thought that is exactly the voice I thought this artist would have. So listen, you have to go watch that.
Yeah, like maybe we could link to it. Although with a caveat, it I think I wasn't sure what voice. Not having a voice audible is probably the best thing. I hope this doesn't become an animated movie. So
Don't say that.
it's that
I have a mortgage.
by hoping that it might make it happen. That's all.
Oh, great, perfect.
But at the same time, I recorded that little trailer I made, and I really didn't know, and I didn't have time or a wish to find somebody with the voice that was right, and I don't know whether it was right, and I know that Alex thought it was way wrong, right? That wasn't. You offered to speak it yourself, but I didn't. I couldn't take the time so I record. It was my voice, but artificially deepened enormously. So it was, as authoritative
Oh,
as I
good.
could. But and that was the whole point.
This is the thing I think a lot of people don't know about you, Paul, is your special effects wizardry, and mastery of all things digital.
Oh, there's thank you. And I feel like I'm an amateur would-be master who tries to figure everything out myself without really knowing how it's done. So I get backdoor ways into things. But
I think that's literally how Da Vinci would have described himself, just to make a totally rational comparison between you and Leonardo da Vinci.
yes,
Who could have done great things with Photoshop.
he would have invented it.
So Alex, what was the spark for this book? What made you think of a book like this, with the play on the artist and the still life and bringing it to life? How did it come to be?
Boredom. It was a product of boredom. And love. It was a mixture of love and boredom. I had done a lot of middle grade books, and I really wanted, when my daughter was a baby, I really wanted a picture book, and I knew that they take a while, but I really wanted a picture book I could read to my daughter. And so I just had running in my head, I gotta have an idea for a picture book before she's too old to appreciate it in the same way. So that was just the background noise in my brain. And there was just an evening, in the middle of the night, of doing a baby feeding. I'm sitting there in the little chair with her bottle just kind of stuck there for like
Yeah.
40 minutes, just waiting, and bored, in the dim light. And there were just books stacked everywhere. And there were art books I'd inherited. My grandmother was the oldest at the time, the oldest living docent at the Baltimore Museum of Art. And she had this huge collection of art books. And when she passed, I inherited them all. So I just had art books everywhere. and I was staring at the cover of one and couldn't turn the pages. I'm holding a bottle and a baby, so I'm just staring at the cover, and it was a still life. Just for a really long time, standing at one painting. It's, like when I go to the museum, I love to sit and look at one painting for a while, but half an hour, 40 minutes, I don't know. And so as I was staring at it, I was just pondering what was going on, and the brush strokes and how it was made. And if you could just keep looking closer and closer, would you see stories in it? And my brain started making up different stories, why the artist put that in. And I thought, oh, that's cool. And so on the notes app on my phone that night, I wrote a draft of, it was called Look Closer. And it was a description of a painting with this artist voice telling you to look closer, and you'd see all these stories playing out within the painting. And it wasn't very good. That draft of that middle of the night draft of a book, but there was some spark there for this idea of what's going on in an image that you think is still. And that was where it started. And then draft after draft after draft, it evolved, and the humor showed up, and the idea that it was specifically narrating about a painting. But the spark was there, just in a late night moment of boredom and caring for someone who needed my full attention, but not really.
So Alex, is it uh, the actual book that you were looking at with the still life? Do you know which it was, or is that lost in the mix?
I have it. I don't remember which it was. There's a certain number it could be. What I've got to do is go look through them. I'll recognize the cover instantly.
I want
Uh,
to know.
Yeah,
so
I do
yeah,
too.
I just need to go look. I think it was probably like a collection of master paintings book, probably. Like, she had a bunch of like time life art books also.
Mhm.
So it could have been one of those, like the Dutch Masters or something like that. But I've got to find the actual book.
Yeah, I want to know who painted that painting.
Yeah, but yeah, and which painting it was. I've been
Oh,
meaning to go do that search. So the problem is this room actually has some of the least amount of books of a room in my house. There, where for those who are listening, we're on a Zoom right now, and they're looking in my office, which is filled with books. But most of my house actually has more books in it. Between my husband being a teacher, me being a writer, and just living a life where books show up and books get purchased and books get mailed to us, and we have a lot of little free libraries and an addiction. And so there's just books everywhere. So it will take a minute to go sorting through my house just to figure out which room this art book is in. But I do need to do it because it was the spark of this thing.
Yeah. And how fun to share with the kids when you do your school visits, another layer of the still life that sparked the still life
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
goes on.
I have in the little slideshow, there is a picture of a still life that could be that one, and I kind of use it as a stand-in, but it would be much better if I had the actual one. And I got a week or two ago, I got to speak to my daughter's first grade class. So I thought of the idea when she was a baby. She's now over 6 years old and in first grade, and I got to read, to visit her sixth grade class and tell this story about when she was a baby, and she was so excited to be part of like a real author's story, and she it's my dedication line at the beginning. Paul has his dedication, I have my dedication, is to her, and so she likes to autograph the book for people as well.
Oh,
I
oh
think
my
it's
God.
great
I
that
was going to ask you if you were able to enjoy the book with your daughter. And it sounds like you're enjoying it and she's enjoying it. And
Yeah.
that's, oh, what a nice full circle
it
kind of
got.
moment that must have been.
I took a long time between beginning and end to get the book finished, so I was responsible for a fair bit of the lapse between her babyhood when Alex had the idea and now when you could read it to her class. But I'm really glad that she's not totally beyond picture book age, that a first grade class can
It's
get.
I think it's actually perfect for first grade. It makes such a good, because some of the jokes are a little complex. You have to have the sense of when the text and the pictures are working against each other. And I really feel like first graders get it. They understand enough what a text is. They're just learning how to really engage with one. Um, and so I'm really glad that you took a while to figure out the textures and the angles and all the things you did in creating that. Because that time it took made her the perfect age to share it with.
Okay, great. Actually, in some books, I've noticed that even when jokes are over the head beyond the age level of kids, for some books, like for Zia's for Moose, for instance, where they don't, if you have to know that it's an alphabet book to get anything, I thought, but it turned out that some very, very young kids glommed onto it because of the emotional attachment that you get. There's a moose, and the moose gets so angry. It's that alone, and also I remember from childhood, like listening to my parents had record albums with comedy routines, and I would think they were so funny. And then later I got older and I got the jokes suddenly. I had no idea what those jokes were. There's something about funny things where the rhythm of it and something, it's funny and it's funny even
Yeah.
if you don't get the joke. So I think that I hope that some of that's going on here too.
Yeah. And I think children, I love listening to children make up jokes because they understand the rhythm and texture of a joke before they understand the content. So they'll often say things they make no sense, but they're delivered perfectly,
Mhm.
with perfect comedic timing, and it's just surrealism. And I love that. And I think there is some of that in the enjoyment of funny picture books before they get all the humor in them. You
Yeah.
get it on like an instinctual level.
Mhm. Exactly.
And just for the record, I think picture books should be enjoyed forever and ever and ever. So I think it was the perfect time for your daughter, but I think a picture book when you're 4 or you're in 4th grade or you're 40 is the perfect time for a picture book. I love them. And I think too with this book, we talked about how kids can really get involved and they can get in on the secret, they can hear the funniness, but as an older reader reading it, as an adult reader, even I can picture this with some of my 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders. The message that I was walking away with as well is that art is whatever we want it to be, right? And this artist thinks still life is this way, but oh, this excitement's happening on the page. And it helped me just remember that I don't have to be quite so in the box all the time, which is I tend to have a harder time getting out of the box than staying in it. And just a good reminder that things can be fun and playful, and that we can have art, and then we can layer art on top of it, and it's imagination. So I think there's something for every reader here, whether they're young or they're older, and it's just simply a fun experience, front to back.
Yeah, and it's an example of the fact that you can only control so much.
Yeah, yeah, that's another great point.
And the artist in the book doesn't enjoy that fact, or maybe he does because he doesn't know what's going on. But that one of the joys of creating any sort of art is that it has a mind of its own, and sometimes it shows you things you didn't expect to see and didn't plan for.
Yeah.
Which is also the act of picture book creation, right? Like working with Paul made my book better and different, and it really made it his book in a way that I never could have planned when I was sitting there just writing it on my phone, or writing the first draft on my phone anyway. That act of collaboration is what makes this kind of creation so much fun.
So that perfect pairing that you 2 didn't know was coming. You knew each other, didn't know it was coming together. It sounds like it was meant to be.
Yeah,
Ah,
I've always really enjoyed reading Alex's books. So, getting to illustrate one was
Yeah.
a kick.
yeah. I do wanna point out too, one of the things that I absolutely love about picture books when this happens, is when I take off that, um, protective sheet on the cover of the
Best
book,
jacket.
and
Yeah.
when I see that the hardcover is not the same as the sleeve on the book, I get such a kick out of that to know that there's this little inner secret, and I know a lot of listeners have written in and say that they love that too, so I wanted to point that out.
You get a cool look at the artist's studio
Yes.
on the cover
Yes.
on the
It's
card.
just so you can see the artist at work, you can see the still life in real life that he's painting on the canvas. I wanted to make sure I said that. I love when that happens. It was such a treat, Paul.
By
to
the
get-
way, thank you, Stephanie. But by the way, that picture on the cover, on the case cover, it's called Underneath the Jacket, is it is the artist sitting in his studio, but it's also it's basically an Easter egg for art lovers because most people won't recognize, but it's Vermeer's painting of called The Artist in His Studio. I mean, that is the pose, and that's this composition of this cover, and so the you see him from behind. It's a painting that I've loved forever, so I just stole it. And the thing that the artist is painting is in Vermeer is an allegory. It's a woman dressed up as a muse. And in front of her, there was a table filled with things. So it really is basically a still life that he's painting, I
Yeah.
think. And then on the back cover, the artist has gone away. And the still life is exactly still the same on the table, except the painting has changed in a way that the book will explain.
Yes. Yes, I loved it. It was just the perfect front and back to really capture that. And
And I
I
love that
didn't
you
realize
can
that
do
was
that.
like, oh, go ahead.
I love that that visually you can do those sort of references to art history. I would have loved to work a verbal, literary reference to like James Joyce in there, but
Oh.
it doesn't work the same way.
Yeah.
Harder to put
Well,
those Easter eggs.
there's a sequel you have to try.
Yeah, yeah. I was just thinking, I was like, what could I have done? Oh, could have had like a shaving bowl, like at the start of Ulysses, stately plump, but Mulligan, what's his name? Yeah, I could have.
How many 5-year-olds would recognize a shaving?
How many are going to recognize your Vermeer reference, right? It's not.
Almost. Oh, and also in the Vermeer, there's a beautiful map on the back wall, which I wasn't going to copy. It's a map of Amsterdam, um, which but it's turned sideways actually. I guess in the 17th century, excuse me, in the 17th century, North wasn't so important. I don't know. But I was going to take some other. So I actually thought I would get an old map of Philadelphia and turn it sideways and put that on the wall. And it looked very, I mean, not that I recognized Philadelphia that much to begin with, but it looked very unrecognizable.
Yeah, we don't have the quite
So
iconic.
I actually sent it to a cousin who lives in Philadelphia to say, without saying what this was, does this map ring a bell to you? Do you know anything like about this map? And she wrote back, had no idea what it was. So I changed it. Now it's a map of Brooklyn.
It's a little more
It
recognized.
incorporates both you and me and
Yeah.
history, Alex. So I know instead of
Oh,
just
that's what. And
current.
I'm just learning this. I did not realize this. I'm gonna look at it right now while we're live
See if
reacting
you
to this.
recognize Brooklyn in there.
That is fantastic.
It's actually Brooklyn from the early Brooklyn before it.
Oh, yeah. So I'm looking at it right now, and that is amazing. I didn't notice that before. That's fantastic.
Wow.
We first met. Oh,
Oh, that is so wonderful. Oh, well, I have had so much fun chatting with both of you and getting the inside scoop to this book. But as our episode kind of comes to an end, I would love to ask both of you two things. Number one, is there anything that you're working on or that you'd like to give us a sneak peek into? And where can listeners find you online so they can learn more and follow your journey, grab the books, all the things?
So I'll start online. I'm on Instagram. I think I'm Alexander_London. I'm not on that Elon Musk website anymore. Where else am I? I have a website, calexanderlondon.com. I'm very Googleable, so like I'm findable if you just search for me. Though there is a fashion designer named Alex London who comes up sometimes too.
Oh.
That's me. And right now I've always got a couple balls in the air. So right now I've just put the finishing touches on a new middle grade novel. It's the second book in a series. The first one is called The Princess Protection Program. And the second book, After Ever After, comes out in February. So we're just finalizing the jacket copy and all that stuff. And it's about escaped fairy tale princesses who don't like how their stories go and they flee to a boarding school in the real world. And book one is about Sleeping Beauty and her escape from her tale, and book two is the princess from the Frog Prince story. The full name of that story is The Frog Prince or Iron Heinrich. That's the full actual Grimm name of the story, and that's relevant to the plot. But my book is called After Ever After. And then I'm midway at working with an amazing illustrator named L. Fury on an illustrated on a graphic memoir from my high school years that will be out sometime years from now. It takes a long time to do. But those are sort of the projects I've got actively going.
Wonderful. And Paul, how about you? And where can people find you online?
Okay, well, in contrast to Alex's many balls in the air, at the moment, mine are not in the air. I'm just on break, on hiatus. I am not working on anything at the moment. I had a whole bunch of stuff recently that came to a head, and I am just waiting it out. I'll see what happens coming up. And in terms of accessing me online, I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm Paul O. Zelinsky, no spaces or periods, just Paul O. Zelinsky, ends with a Y. And so that's on Instagram, and it's on Facebook. I have a page, and I do still have a presence. I still haven't completely stopped the Twitter X thing, which is so depressing to look at, but there are a few things sometimes that made me not stop completely. And Blue Sky, I'm on Blue Sky too.
Oh, yeah, I always forget that one exists. I'm on there too, but I'm never actually on there. Yeah. And
Like,
there's so many of them now, and they're all kind of strange, but
Yeah.
I don't know where that's going to go, but
usually people can find me just wandering in the woods talking to my dog. That tends to be where I'm findable.
the woods of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, the woods of Philadelphia. We have a beautiful park system here, Fairmount Park. I love walking in the woods and daydreaming and letting my dog try and chase squirrels.
Maybe the next creative download will come in that quiet space instead of a nighttime feeding. It will be a walk in the woods.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on to talk about your wonderful picture book. I can't wait for people to read it, to hear about it, but more importantly, to share it, see the kids leaning in and getting in on the story and just enjoying it. I will make sure to put the links to your websites or social media handles, and of course to the books that were mentioned in this episode in the show notes to make it easy for everyone to find. And I just want to end with another big thank you. This is a great conversation. I love knowing so much more of the backstory, and I really appreciate the time you both took to come here today.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. It was really great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.